Hello, my name is Michaela O'Connor Abrams, founder of Mocha Plus. Welcome to our Collective Conscience series. We created this series for you to bring together great minds from around the world on myriad topics that we hope will expand your mind, will challenge your current beliefs, and give you an opportunity to be inspired with every video. Enjoy.
It was so far back in time. Computers were around, but a lot of the CEOs had them on their desk, but they didn't really know how to use them. They were more like a decoration, So we started a fax newsletter. We figured, a fax they would read, and we got people like Cy Newhouse and all the CEOs started reading it, and it became a hot insidery kind of thing. And then I got hired by Advertising Age, which in those days we would get, every Monday it would come out and people would deliberately hold scoops to get it into Ad Age. So I was lucky because the thing that I always liked to do was break news. And the places that I worked always wanted to do that. So what I wanted to do, what they wanted done, coincided very nicely. And it's to this day at the Post, it's the same way.
For you, maybe. When you wanted to break the news, those of us on the other side of that telephone.
Yeah. Although people tell me they like because there is such an avalanche of news as well, and so many other different outlets. And now, since I'm sort of a veteran observer of the scene, my editors say, and people in the field say they like the analysis because there's so much scattershot machine gun news coming out. They like somebody to kind of put it in perspective, for them. So it's interesting. It's kind of shifted a little bit. The faster it got, the more valuable analysis became. So that's where we are now.
Well, and I think also that there's in New York, there really isn't any other place that I can think of where the dailies held the sway that they did. That what you picked up on the way into the subway, you got the news. You got the Post.
True. Yeah.
There were sports, and each one of them held their own. But everyone was carrying them, and
totally. I mean, when I started at the Post, we were selling 1 million copies a day in a city of 8 million. So, you could figure half the people are kids. So there's a good chance the reason why we were getting such tremendous buzz was because we had the market saturated. Most everybody, either they bought it or they read it secondhand, but there was a good chance that if you had something in there, that they would see it. And this was even before where everything was instantly available on digital. People still picked up the print thing, and that was their barometer.
Why do you think there was so much interest in the goings on in the media? I mean, certainly it was glitzy, it was bright, it was glossy.
Sure. I mean, the glossies were exciting places. They were making a lot of money, and also within New York, it was a pretty substantial business in New York. It wasn't maybe as big as Wall Street, but I would say it was probably about the third or fourth biggest industry, publishing. So it had a viable economic reason other than just the buzz factor.
Right.
Yeah.
Just help. Well, I mean, I think that's. And how do you think that? I mean, it's been now since, for example, describing the scene at Michael's, the restaurant, the lunch scene at Michael's. That whole, that's where really the Titans came to CNBC. And it really was, and it was an intentional. It was an intentional drive-by.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. Somebody started doing lunch at Michael's as a regular weekly. Every Wednesday, and so that became, even though it was always a CNBC, they wanted to CNBC and have somebody write about it. So that became an even more. And Michael's was just packing them in everywhere. They had tables in like aisles, tables leading up to the stairs, going out the door, and you always had to be in the front room. Never the back room. That wasn't quite Siberia, but you weren't in the know if you weren't in the front room.
Right.
Although there were a few people that deliberately always went to the back room. I remember Ann Moore, when she was running Time Inc., or actually, I guess he was with
Mhm.
People, would go to the back. And Richard Parsons, when he was with Time Warner, he would go to the back. So some of them wanted to go to Michael's, but didn't want everybody to see and to who they were talking with. So I always thought whoever I was with was the interesting person. So I always figured the PR people would tell me if there was somebody at, 5 tables away that I should go see. So
Yeah, it's interesting. We didn't have that, Michaela, by the time, when Michaela and I were working together at Dwell, the West Coast publishing scene was it was really much more removed from all of this kind of action.
it
But
was also remote. San Francisco had a pretty good publishing hub. But LA never, it's LA's second biggest city, but it never really had as big a publishing. They were more the TV side and the movie side was
Well,
kind
and
of
they had a huge ad club. The LA ad club
yeah,
was,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think, larger, maybe not larger than New York, but it was enormous. I mean, those lunches were in the Beverly Hilton, and I don't know, 800 people were at these. So it was kind of the hub of agencies and clients more than it was publishing at the time. But speaking of, if I may add to this, even as it regards New York, albeit it was a national event, the places and the events like the American Magazine Conference, the American Society of Magazine Editors, the forays, the events that were just thought of as the most important events you could possibly have.
the Ellie's.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of these. And as we all know, at present, there's no AMC anymore.
No, they don't do it anymore.
There's no AMC. There's no other place really that publishers gather like that.
Yeah, well, it's a sign of like they used to. It was much more of a gentleman's profession. They used to always position it in a warm water place so that the executives and the publishers could golf. They would have some mornings of conferences, and then they'd hit the links. Sometimes by 11 o'clock. And there was a time when a 2 or 3 day out of your work schedule was kind of a not an unusual thing to do. Then they started shortening it, but they always got phenomenal speakers. I still remember, General Schwarzkopf being there. I think you were involved with getting him there, and it was after the Persian Gulf War. He had retired, had stepped down, and they asked him, why didn't you topple Saddam Hussein? And he gave. I still remember he's explaining how, you got to remember we had a coalition of 30 some odd nations, and our mission was to liberate Kuwait. If we had toppled Hussein, all our Arab allies, we had Egypt and Saudi, and everybody would have said, aha, they really were going for regime change. It wasn't to liberate Kuwait, and we would have lost all of them. And it's interesting because that was the problem when we reinvaded it. Nobody trusted us by the time we went back in again. And I still remember that. And we had Barack Obama when he was a senator, flew out there, and he had just come out with his book, and that was where he let loose the famous "I inhaled." That was the point.
Right.
I remember he was a senator. He wasn't sure if he was going to run. He didn't say. He was kind of leaning that way. But so, I met the night before, we were having a dinner with Jason Bin. Always used to get a little thing going, and he got Senator Obama to come by and shake hands with us and say a few words, and then that was his famous one-liner from his book, like, "Did you ever inhale?" And he said, "I inhaled. That was the point." And so I had to go and ask him. I said, "Let me make sure I got that quote right. I inhaled. That was the point." John McCain there. He got in a scuffle with some old woman at the craps table when we were in Puerto Rico, because they had gambling in the hotel, and he was an old airman, and they were, I guess, they, she had established a spot and didn't want to give it up. It was in between McCain's run, then it was Puerto Rico, so she didn't seem to be too cognizant of who John McCain was. It was a couple of years before he got the nomination. And if she did know who he was, she didn't care. She wanted her spot. So a lot of interesting sidelights on it. But
So
yeah, it was Bill Clinton was there one year. You know, it was it was a stop on the tour for sure.
absolutely. I'm remembering San Francisco. I had the pleasure of being the host and the MC, and it was Nancy Pelosi, Schwarzenegger. Um, the list just kept going, and I kept thinking, oh my God, I've got to introduce all these people who have very different thoughts and interests on things. It was Nancy also because of being from San Francisco, and
Right.
she wanted to warmly welcome everybody to her city. So it was a place that was, and photographs of each of these events that went on in every newspaper and every magazine that covered it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But that really finally, I shouldn't say finally, but it went away. It waned and went away.
Yeah,
American
they started
society-
shortening it because the tempo of the business started stepping up. People didn't want to spend 3 days outside of the office, so then it became a 2-day event. And then I think by the time they ended it, it was like a 1-day event and the National Magazine Awards. So
Right. And so let's talk about the National Magazine Awards. I mean, these two were, every editor and CEO and publisher worked really hard to win that every year, because it not only meant that you were doing great work, but it also, of course, helped the business. So I mean, I know they still have the awards, there's still the Ellie, but what do they mean anymore, Keith? And how do you talk about them and report on them?
Oh, I just lost you.
Whoop.
Did I lose you?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
I can hear you okay. Let me see here.
We see you.
We see you.
You know what? Try hitting the Zoom icon on your dock in the bottom of your. I think that might bring you back.
Let's see. Oh, there we go.
Okay. So my question was, there's still an American Society of Magazine Editors, really the standards body for what editors were to adhere to, if in fact they were real journalists in the field and whatever industry they were covering. And there are still the Ellies, but what do they mean anymore, really? And how do you?
Well, the one problem that they have is this. The list of awards is just too long. They give out 30 different awards on things. I mean, the National Book Awards does 4, so everybody gets a good deal of publicity. The National Magazine Awards, I think they wanted to bring digital publishing into it, which was good. And for a while they were doing, okay, we'll do a print version and a digital version on 2 different days. And I don't know, that became too long, but I think there's too many of them. They blunt their impact. I think they should tighten it up. It's still an awards that is most pronounced by, they like to say it's the Pulitzer Prize of the publishing world, but the Pulitzer Prize and rather the Academy Award of the publishing world, but the Academy Award is understood by everybody across the spectrum. The National Magazine Awards really are only understood by the industry insiders. I think it's more of a prestige thing for the writers and editors to be honored. I don't know if it translates into ad sales and revenue per se. I think it's more of a prestige thing. And it's great to be honored by your peers. I mean, what's better than that?
Sure. Well, I mean, this is the thing, and you just mentioned, digital media, and it's a good thing they covered it, because otherwise, it would be celebrating, an ossified industry in what then became an ossified process of awarding great work, right?
Yeah.
It was true that publishers who were in the know, and a lot of them actually came out of technology media because they were covering the industry, right?
Okay.
Had known that this Omnimedia idea, which was not coined by Martha Stewart, even though that's popular thought, but had been brewing for a very long time, was what good brands really knew they could do is expand the reach of their audience across the media and still not be hiring lots of different people to do that, but to really holistically look at the industry. What did that do to the way you reported the scoop and in terms of yours?
Well, it definitely added a whole like category of people, like the Vices and the BuzzFeeds and all of Huffington Post, all of them became part of the mix. They're definitely big and booming, and well, they were booming, and nobody's booming now, but so it expanded the field. They didn't seem to have that same intramural rivalry as the old publishing world, though, because they were, I think a lot of them, my read on it, were driven by an M&A sensibility, like Talking Biz News or Digi Daily. They had like connections with the bankers and like, oh, they just got a new round of funding, and that a lot of that became the big buzz part of that part of the industry. And now I'd say even before the coronavirus hit in the past year, a lot of the investors were saying, you know what, you got to start trying to make a little bit of money here for us. We're not going to just keep investing and have a Series D round of investing. At some point, you guys got to start making money, and that became a bit of a problem. And that's why even before the coronavirus hit, a lot of them were retrenching and rethinking what they were doing. So,
Well, and so you covered, especially in the last 10 years, you've covered a lot about what these companies, these startups did, who were coming in to claim a news position, right? Dare I say, a journalistic position, uncovering the industry, the general news cycle.
yeah.
And you've been reasonably critical of them, and a lot of us probably on this community Zoom call agree. But who in your mind has done the best job of upholding what perhaps we would have called the gold standard of magazine editorial in the digital world? Who do you think is doing and has done this well, if anybody?
Well, a lot of them do it well. I think there's been a lot of good stuff by BuzzFeed. Politico has done very well on the political front. Vice, they broke that whole Jeffrey Toobin story the other day. He was caught on a Zoom meeting pleasuring himself, and now he's suspended from the New Yorker. It was, that was their reporting. I didn't actually write the initial story, but it was like one of those stories that kept playing out. And I think about the third or fourth day, my take on it was, all right, what if he says he's a sex addict and he's going to go to rehab, or is there some thing, since the office is now extended into somebody's house, does he get off a little bit easier on? And I talked to a couple of labor employment lawyers, and they said, the two that had a strong opinion, I said, no way, you can't do that. It doesn't matter, what is they said he doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, so that they don't think he's going to be able to be suspended and come back. They just think that's the end of that.
Right.
So so that was like the fourth day of the third day of the story. It ended up being like the second most traffic story in the Post that day. And interesting enough, the longest lead time of minutes spent with the story, which I was kind of gratified to see. Which meant they read the story completely. They didn't just read the first paragraph.
So that leads to my next question. The Post is the fourth largest newspaper in the United States, just
Right.
behind the Journal and the Times and USA Today.
Yeah.
So as a reporter on the industry, and looking at the reach that you have, How have you been able to adapt to a news cycle that is also full of advocacy journalism and some interesting ways of reporting stories that aren't really about reporting the facts, but reporting the story as somebody wants to tell it because of their own interest in it? Is there a lot of that? I mean, share with us what that looks like without
Uh,
compromising your sources and your colleagues, but there's a great
well,
deal of discussion about this, obviously.
yeah. It's hard to say in the abstract exactly what it is. I mean, one of the things, I mean, for a while there, we were competing with Gawker, which was a sort of a, in some ways, I resented them because they took what the Post did between gossip and media and turned it into a business, which until he got his butt sued by Hulk Hogan, he was making money. But then he couldn't withstand the lawsuit, which put out one of the problems. You can't just trash somebody. There didn't seem to be enough of a journalistic check and balance on some of the operations. And the Post was always a target of Nick Denton's. So whenever he screwed up, my editors were very happy to run negative stuff on him. But one of the problems that they would do, I remember there was one story where they were trying to trash somebody on the Post. And I don't know, the story was, they posted the story about one of the Page Six reporters teamed up with one of his buddies who got a freelance assignment, and they were a bit crude. They said they decided they were going to go to I think it was BMW or some car company was sponsoring him, gave him a junket. So they decided they were going to trash the hotel room like rock stars. And he said one of them got so drunk that he, this gets a little crude. They took a crap in the bed, and then he took the sheets off and threw them in the fireplace and set it on fire to try and cover it up. So Gawker runs this story. So the Page Six guy goes, nah, that didn't happen. So they get News Corp to send a legal letter, and they say, okay, well, maybe it wasn't this guy, and maybe it wasn't this hotel, but we know it happened somewhere. So if anybody has any information, send it to us. And I'm like, well, that's a complete backwards way to do a story. It's like you wrote this story and then you started trying to find facts to back up the story. Now the story is inconsequential. They were just trying to embarrass us, if true, and whatever. But it seems like it was not true, but they had it up on their site. So that was one of the drawbacks of a lot of that kind of reporting. It was shoot first, ask questions later, where we would, you get tips all the time that they don't pan out. You say like, it seems logical, and I'm working on it, but it's not there yet. So that is one of the flaws of the instant access to a story, and maybe taking a little more time and a little more journalistic integrity in doing it.
But you seem to think that there is a modicum of journalistic integrity going on at a number of companies. You don't seem to be really.
Yes, I do. I think that they definitely, in the 20 years that I've been at the Post, when I first started, in the late 90s, it would like, oh, we don't want to put that online because that will ruin it for the print. Now, we put it online, and I'm like, hey, what's taking you guys? Get that thing online immediately, and then it will go in the next day's paper. So that's so it's a complete flip of the way it was when I in the 2 decades since I started at the Post. Right. Digital leads the way on all news vehicles. It's also a great way to beat the competition because if you don't have it to the next day's paper, And it's also a plus and a minus because say somebody beats you on a story, your editor comes over and says, "Hey, what happened?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll check it out." And within an hour or so, you've matched the story. Whereas in the old days, if you got beaten on a story, you had to drag your tail around for a day before you could do anything. And the same thing if you were first on a story, which I like to think happened more often than not, you beat the competition for the next 24 hours. You were like king of the hill for a day.
It did happen more often than not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did happen more.
Yes, it did.
But I think that's what's so interesting is how you, especially in these kind of hives of gossip and innuendo and people, movers and shakers. And I mean, it really was quite a scene back then and it was the consumption of media was different. If you picked up the Post, you were picking it up for a number of reasons. It could have been sports and news, but certainly Page Six and certainly Media Inc.
Sure.
And now there's this, you have there's a different way that it's measured. You knew the influence of your column. It was measured in something that's not quantifiable, really, except for in influence. It was you had influence, and
yeah. Well, I think that long before I got to the Post, that was, I don't know which, who on high came up with this theory, but they realized like one way to get attention in the media is if we became the arbiters of media. So we covered media, and guess what? Everybody in media wanted to read about media, so it elevated our standard. I remember Michael Wolff, when he was at New York Magazine, did a nice feature on me, and he said one of the reasons why they put Media Inc. in the business section, which was fairly into the paper, is because they wanted to drag all the liberals through the editorial pages before they got to our media sections in the Post. And I'm like, that might be right. I don't, I'm the beneficiary, no matter what the motivation is, I don't care. I'm not on the political side of the stuff. So whatever reason they come to my column and our business section and the other media reporters is good, but yeah, but it was definitely it definitely elevated the standard. I benefited from their status. I think one of the big reasons why I was at the Daily News at the time, and we were starting to break some stories there. One of the stories where I broke was, at the time, Rupert Murdoch owned TV Guide and News Corp, and he was going to sell 50% of it to John Malone. There was some kind of deal going on where one of Malone's subsidiary companies, and Malone had always resisted whatever. So whatever the reason is, there was always this friction between the two of them. And now they were making peace, and we got the scoop. So I remember calling the guy up, verifying that it is, and he had no comment. And then after I got into the News Corp and we still own TV Guide, I said, we ran the story anyway. We had it confirmed from one of my old time sources who was active in the banking world. And I called up the guy at the company and I said, "Hey, this was Malone's side." I said, "Remember when I called you up about that story?" He goes, "I do." I hung up the phone immediately and I said, "We have a leak." So, and then a month or two later, I got hired by the Post. So I'm sure it was at least tangentially related.
Well, you had an incredible way of getting your news, your scoop, always from CEOs. I mean, Pat McGovern was an example of that, right? You went right to him. I mean, so industry standards on the block, and you.
Yeah, well, he gave me the scoop when they were starting it. When he was spinning off the Four Dummies thing, he gave me the scoop. I don't know why. I just hit it off with him. We had a charity called the Kelly Gang. He would write a check out for us every year. He was a terrific guy. And really, he was out of the mainstream. He was up from Boston. So I think he wanted to touch bases with somebody in the publishing scene, but I became the beneficiary of him making his connections. every few months he'd come to town. Every few months I get a good scoop out of him. So, and I think the other reason is, they always liked it when I covered their nearest competitor, but I think they always recognize that, these are not just hit and run type stories. I'm on the beat for a long time. I'm not going to run something that is just, scurrilous and, I want it to be sensational, but I also want it to be right. And I think they didn't like everything I wrote, but they realized that on balance, you get a fair shake. And I think that was the thing. They figured it's better to, even if it's controversial and unpopular, to deal with it and at least get our version of the bad story into the paper or into the column. So,
well, because it made it more than gossip. I mean, I think that's part of it. But
more than gossip, we covered business the way the Post covers business like sports. I think there's winners and losers, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, and there is there is gossip mixed into it. Somebody had something about Melania reading something, Melania Trump reading something about, two people from Vogue that they're going freelance, and whoever was writing the story said she was devouring it with all the granularity of a Keith Kelly column, which was very nice. And I'm like, I emailed him back and I said, I think the New York Post is the only newspaper allowed into the White House, so she has to read it.
And how does it feel? We were talking before about the newsroom and the way, and what's the COVID version of the newsroom?
It's tough. It's definitely, we're a veteran news team on our business desk, so it's not impossible for us to work remotely, but you do miss the, hey, did you hear this? I was talking to, Steve Cohen and he said this about, or, you get that passing thing from somebody in the sports section. Hey, one of my friends works for Sports Illustrated. He said this, and then, they become big stories. So you miss that tip thing. We can survive. I mean, we still get good stuff out there. I think what's going to happen, a lot of the presidents and CEOs, as this thing drags on into the next year, and people start retiring, coming and going, it's instilling the culture of a place to new people. Like, I know what the culture of the place is, and most of my colleagues know, but if you land, there's a certain, I don't know, spirit and that you're not going to get if you're not in the newsroom. So I don't know what's going to happen on that.
Energy, certain energy.
It's a certain energy, a certain spirit, a certain a certain camaraderie, a certain lunacy. Somehow, I don't know. Even editors like screaming and throwing stuff. They can't throw stuff at you. It's like you can't throw stuff back.
Oh, nobody threw anything at you ever, Keith. Ever.
Not too often, but every now and then. So
wonderful. So Shelley, I thought we would go to chat and see how we're doing there so that we make sure to include everybody and their questions.
We do. We did talk a little bit at the outset about the news and what Keith can and cannot comment on about the Post, but I'm happy to read the question and see what happens.
Okay.
Yesterday, there was an op-ed in the New York Times that talked about the Wall Street Journal's decision not to take the bait and do a big story that the Trump administration had delivered to them as a scoop. The story of Hunter Biden's laptop and the allegation that Joe Biden was involved in a graft. They hailed the Wall Street Journal's actions as a return of the gatekeepers. And that's something we talked about, Michaela and I were talking about before in preparing questions for you, is this notion of the gatekeepers in media, coming this kind of full circle moment in media. Do you agree, and do you find the Wall Street Journal's actions laudable?
I do. It was good. A lot of people, I wasn't involved in any of the political process, so I don't really know, the story, other than what has been written about it, because I wasn't in the meetings and whatnot. My read on it is like tabloids always take things and make a big commotion out of them. So in a sense, that's what the Post did with that story. That there is a few lines in there that, oh, maybe, Hunter Biden did, I think ultimately what it looks like is Hunter Biden was trafficking in his father's name, but there's still that question. Maybe maybe could Joe have been, and that's what we blew up into a major story. The Journal would not do that. They would not blow it into a major story unless they were convinced it was a major story. 60 Minutes wouldn't go near it. They're like, we got to be able to verify it. Where would this, So, Ben Smith's commentary, it's interesting because he was the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed, and now he's at the New York Times as the media columnist. So it's interesting. He's sort of reinforcing his own career path. It's like, hey, now we do this. But I think both publications did what they do. The one thing about the Post, it's no hold bars where their political allegiances are. Now I'm relatively immune to that because I'm not in the political swirl, thankfully. But it's not like they have a hidden agenda. Like everybody knows where they're coming from on the political spectrum. So I guess the bottom line question is are they acting as more as gatekeepers now than they were, say, 4 years ago? I like to think they are. I like to think Ben is correct in that assessment. So,
well, we have a very important question from an aspiring journalist here. Taylor asks, any tips for young journalists? What should we as young writers expect within the future of media? How do we keep journalism intact with the decline of print news?
Well, obviously the skill set is rapidly expanding. I think thankfully most of you are coming in are well armed with the social media scene. Like I'm still, to me it was like an add-on skill, like good story, I better tweet it out, that kind of a thing. Whereas, TikTok and Instagram and all that, you grew up with it. So just utilize all of that. Video is big. I would say for any aspiring journalist, don't be one-dimensional. Be a multifaceted person. Hey, I can take video and photographs and do interviews, and I can still write. I think that's still an important factor. That
Good to hear. Good.
I would say, I gave this advice like years ago to kids, and I think still valid, is like try and work on these school publications, because unlike the medical profession, they don't let you go operate on patients when you're a first year medical student. But in journalism, the stuff you'll be doing right out of the gate, could be training you for your career, and you're allowed to do it. You'll make mistakes, you'll learn from them. But I would say work on the school paper. It's probably, I don't know how many of them actually even print papers nowadays. So they still call it the school paper. Work on it and utilize it.
So Keith, we have a question about the two titans of tech media, Bill Ziff and Pat McGovern. Well, there were other tech companies. Really, those were the two running the majority. So what's your take on the Bill Ziff versus Pat McGovern?
Oh, I guess at the end, IDG seemed to survive and thrive. Whereas Ziff, funny thing with Ziff though, he actually started out with things like popular photography and car and driver and the enthusiast. So he actually had a couple of careers. He sold all of those magazines and made, I don't know, at the time was 350 million or something like that. And he left only these small obscure things like PC Magazine and Macworld and what were they actually? And they became far bigger. Then he eventually sold them to SoftBank for 1.3 billion. Whereas Pat McGovern kept his going, expanded globally. So I think at the end, the more low profile Pat McGovern became, I guess, the ultimate tech titan
Yeah.
of publishing.
He was one incredible man. I mean, they both were in their own right, but yeah, little
I think my read was that McGovern always rewarded his employees and cut them in on a lot of the profits and whatnot, more so than I think Bill Ziff did.
Well, he also had a vertically integrated strategy, not the matrix organization. And he always believed that
very
everybody needed to own their own brand and not homogenize any part of the operation.
Right.
Very different.
Yeah, they could be like a hub in Framingham, Massachusetts, another up Peterborough, New Hampshire, and each guy was like his own little mini CEO of whatever publications were in his orbit. Right.
Well, you have one of those CEOs on the community tonight in Jim Casella.
Ah, hey Jim, how you doing, man?
You
were out at the San Francisco wing of the company, right?
You can unmute.
That's correct, Keith.
Yeah.
I came off mute. Nice to see you. Absolutely.
Same here.
And traveled the world in a plane about 400,000 miles a year.
Oh man. Yeah, well, they had things on every continent in the world, I think, right? Except he did for his own sake one time produced a publication in Antarctica just so he could say he published on every continent.
Unfortunately, he got pneumonia when he came back from there, and he was pretty ill for a while from that trip.
I did not.
So the flag got planted, but he paid the price on that one.
It was an interesting circulation strategy, also.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting if just to add to go back just to Taylor's question. I think also what's exemplified and what you can see here is it's relationships. Relationships are so important on both sides of this equation in media. And I think if you look at the way my screen is, we have Michaela and then I'm in the middle and then there's Keith. And in a lot of organizations, that's sort of how it works. You have somebody who's I was that gatekeeper and had the relationship with Keith where I knew if he had an item and I had to, then he had it there, I could trust him to get it right. And so, and he knew that if we were having a conversation that there was something in it for him. So we have a relationship in the same, with Michaela and, as with Jim, it's just, I think it's everything, building these networks and connections. And I think then in the kind of the olden days, those relationships were amplified. It was almost as though it reflected the culture. Everything was on 11, just really loud and amplified. And now the relationships still exist, but it's a very, very different landscape, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah. It's definitely, I mean, I'm still kind of US centric. I don't cover as much of Europe, but it's a global thing. It's just, which, it's got its pluses and minuses. It's not as clubby and competitive in one sense, but it opens up a whole new world and new horizons for everybody too. So, and it's chaotic, so it's never a dull moment. So there's plenty to write about.
Yeah. Well, we are at the end of our hour and a couple minutes over. I want to thank you, Keith, so much. I
enjoyed it a lot.
Getting beyond this so that we can meet at Kelly's for a beer again and talk about what's next and who the power brokers are.
Last time we met was, where were we?
It was in November. It was very cold and you rode up on your bicycle.
It was Peace Tavern. Yeah.
You were on your bike.
Yeah. That was like one of the things I miss about not going. I mean, now I'm walking the 8 floors down the stairwell, but I'm like, it's not as much fun as biking. I got nowhere to bike.
Really. Yeah. Well, thank you, Keith, for especially starting this at 9 o'clock your time.
The trip down memory lane. It was great.
It was.
It's really great. And everybody, thank you for joining us. Anna, thank you for your question. And Jim, it's wonderful. Keith, I think, you know, you were one of our guests who has to return early in 2021
I'll be delighted.
when we're
Perfect.
talking about a whole different news cycle and what
Hopefully, yeah, hopefully this thing
Going
is a little bit
Get a
further
scoop.
behind us.
that's right.
Hopefully this is behind us.
Hope
Yeah.
so. Hope so.
Right.
But thank you, everybody. And
All right, stay safe,
excited and
everybody.
stay tuned for next Monday when we have another fall pairing you won't want to miss. Take care and have a great week.
Take care.
All right,
Thank
enjoy
you.
it. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.